and Audrey Festeriga this beautiful Thanksgiving Monday. I hope people are taking a well-deserved break with family this weekend, because when this time of year rolls around, it's not just the pumpkin pie that's on people's mind. It's what we're grateful for and what kind of tomorrow we want for the people gathered around the Thanksgiving table. And in just 7 days, that's exactly the choice we get to make. We're facing two very different visions for our country. One that will move us forward, and the other that will take us backward. If that seems like a familiar choice, it's because it is. After a decade of cuts under the previous Conservative government, in 2015, Canadians voted for change. They voted for a team that would invest in their future and stand up for their families. So when our neighbors to the south said they wanted to rip up NAFTA, we promised we would have your back. And you know what? We got the job done. We secured free trade access to our most important partner in an era of U.S. protectionism. We stood up for steel and aluminum workers across the country and got the unfair tariffs lifted. That is a win for Canada. Bravo. Bravo. But some politicians want to undo that progress we've made together. And I'm not just talking about the fact that the NDP would scrap the new NAFTA, plunging Canada's economy into uncertainty. I'm talking about Andrew Scheer's cuts. Just like he wasn't on Team Canada for NAFTA, urging us instead to fold to Donald Trump's demands. This election, Andrew Scheer has decided to give up on the middle class. It's clear now why the Conservatives waited until the Friday night of a long weekend to release their so-called plan. Because you can sum up Scheer's platform in 3 words: cuts, cuts, cuts. No wonder he's been hiding it for so long. He doesn't want Canadians to notice his $53 billion in cuts, cuts that would be 4 times deeper than Doug Ford's. I think Canadians will notice. I think people have seen enough from these Conservatives. And on October 21st, our choice couldn't be clearer. Andrew Scheer would cut services for families and give a $50,000 tax break to millionaires. Liberals will lower taxes again for the middle class. In fact, it's the very first thing we'll do if we are re-elected to government. The first thing Andrew Scheer would do, rip up Canada's only real climate plan, taking back the money we've been putting in people's pockets by making big polluters pay. The middle class deserves better than Andrew Scheer's reckless cuts. And the only way to stop these Conservative cuts is to vote Liberal. Because just like the NDP couldn't stop Stephen Harper or Doug Ford, they can't stop Andrew Scheer. In 2015, we closed the book on the Harper decade, and we can't afford to go back. Mes amis, notre plan
Friends,
est ambitieux.
Our plan is ambitious, but in order to implement it, we have to unite Canadians. Remember what I said during the 2015 campaign. The Conservatives are not our enemies, they're our neighbors. They share the same concerns. The reality is that politicians, Conservative politicians, have no concrete plan to answer those concerns. But we do. Andrew Scheer wants to lower taxes for millionaires. We want to lower taxes for the middle class. Andrew Scheer wants to relax gun control. We want to ban the type of weapons that took the lives of students at Dawson College and Polytechnique. Conservative politicians want to abolish the first plan, the only plan that Canada has ever had to fight climate change. And we want to continue to move forward. There is a choice to be made on October 21st, and that choice could not be clearer.
Today, we have a choice to make. Do we double down on Doug Ford's cuts with Andrew Scheer? Cuts to education, cuts to health care, cuts to child care and to infrastructure? Or do we keep moving forward? My friends, let's do what Canadians always do. Let's pull together and stop conservative cuts. Together, let's choose forward. Merci beaucoup, mes amis.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. It's Joanna Smith from the Canadian Press. Your book, as you know, of course, was called Common Ground. Jagmeet Singh has laid out 6 priorities, and I'm wondering if you share common ground with him on any of them.
I'm campaigning hard to stop conservative cuts and elect a progressive government.
In 2015, you promised that that would be the last election voted under the first past the post system. Of course, that promise was walked away from. Would a re-elected Liberal government consider at all any change, any electoral reform, including alternative vote, preferential ballot, or is electoral reform completely off the table?
We worked hard over the course of a year to try and find consensus on changing our electoral system, and that consensus was not to be found. In this election, our focus is on electing a progressive government, not a progressive opposition, and ensuring that we stop conservative cuts.
Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Singh's talked about his willingness to work with you. He opposes the expansion of the TMX pipeline. Can you categorically deny that you would block that expansion if that was a condition of his support?
We made the decision to move forward on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion and invest all the profits into the green energy transition and fighting climate change because it was in the national interest. That is what we're going to continue to do. But our priority now is to elect a government that keeps moving Canadians forward and stop conservative cuts. Okay. Nous avons pris la décision.
We made the decision to build that pipeline and to invest all the profits in a green transition in order to fight climate change, because that is in the interests of all Canadians. We will continue to work very hard to elect a progressive government, one that is against conservative cuts.
The government was elected in 2015 on a pledge to forge consensus, yet there are many people in Western Canada who are angry and mistrustful of this government. If you were re-elected, how would you go about assuaging some of those concerns and avoiding a potential unity crisis in this country?
We recognize that people in Alberta have been through a very difficult few years with the price of oil, with the challenges to their economy. Canadians have done what Canadians are always doing. We were there for each other. We invested in infrastructure in Alberta. We made changes to the EI program, and we approved and have shovels in the ground on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion to get our resources to new markets and get a better price for them, and to invest in a clean economy and fight climate change with all the profits. These are the things that Canadians right across the country expect. These are what Albertans expect from their government: to invest in our families, to invest in our communities, to invest in a stronger future. We're going to continue to fight hard for Albertans and for Canadians from coast to coast to coast, because we know the Canadians right across the country are facing a choice between conservative cuts and investments in their future with a Liberal government.
Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada, Mr. Trudeau, you are calling on people to vote strategically to defeat the Conservatives. You say that a vote for the NDP or for the Bloc is not worth anything. Is there not something cynical in that? And are you not afraid that you might send the message to voters that you're desperate to remain in power? On the contrary, we saw what happened for 10 years under Stephen Harper, where we had a strong NDP and even a strong bloc in Ottawa. Harper cut to culture. He backed away on the Kyoto Protocol and environmental protection. He continually hurt Canadian families with his cuts, and he wasn't able to create economic growth to compensate for those cuts. So the choice is clear. For 4 years, we have been taking a different approach. We decided to invest in Canadians, We lifted 900,000 Canadians out of poverty, including 300,000 children. And at the same time, we saw the lowest unemployment rate in decades and the creation of 1 million new jobs, most of them full-time. We have shown that the conservative approach of cuts and austerity doesn't work. And now we need a government that is progressive, with Quebecers, with people right across the country getting involved in that government, to fight conservatives like Jason Kenney and Doug Ford, to stand up to international forces like Donald Trump, who wanted to take away our supply management system and hurt steel and aluminum workers in Canada. The choice is clear in terms of the type of government that Canadians want, and we are proud to be able to present an ambitious and optimistic platform.
I think it's very clear to Canadians what happened under Stephen Harper when we had a strong NDP and when we had a strong bloc. Cuts to culture, cuts to services, cuts to veterans. Nothing done on climate change, and indeed a retreat from Kyoto. The progressive opposition couldn't prevent Stephen Harper's cuts. And we took a very different approach 4 years ago from the Conservatives. We said, actually, Stephen Harper failed to grow the economy, even with all his cuts and austerity. So we will take a different approach. And we invested in Canadians. We invested in places like Windsor, in infrastructure like the Gordie Howe Bridge. That's the next one over. We invested in communities. And not only did we lift 900,000 people out of poverty, including 300,000 kids, not only did we move forward on the first and only serious plan to fight climate change that Canada has ever had, but we also saw the lowest unemployment rate in a generation, and Canadians creating over 1 million new jobs, most of them full-time. And the choice now is, do we want to go back to conservative cuts, or do we want to keep moving forward and do the great work Canadians have been doing over the past 4 years?
Now, Spanish justice has issued an arrest warrant against the Catalan president and a number of Catalan activists. Some are in prison, and some are saying this is an attack on democracy. Will you condemn those convictions like the Bloc leader? Though those are international decisions, and I have no comment to make on that.
The first question here today was about what common ground you might have with Jagmeet Singh. You didn't answer. You're visiting 3 ridings currently held by NDP MPs. That's a lot of Canadians voted for NDP. What message does it send that you won't answer that question?
Over the past 4 years, we've made significant investments in the Windsor area, whether it's through the Canada Child Benefit that have lifted thousands of kids out of poverty, whether it's through investments in infrastructure. Gordie Howe Bridge is one example, but there are many others of a federal government that believes in investing in Windsor. But mostly we were able to stand up to Donald Trump and his punitive tariffs on steel and aluminum. We were able to stand up when he wanted to tear up a trade deal that Windsor, indeed all Canadians, rely on. And we gathered Canadians together from coast to coast to coast, across the political spectrum, across all different backgrounds, from business, from labor, from different orders of government. And we approached this with a Team Canada that got it done. We secured a good trade deal with our most important trading partner at a time of American protectionism and uncertainty. And all the while, Andrew Scheer was saying that we had to cave. We had to just get any deal at any cost because NAFTA was too important and because that's what Stephen Harper told him to say. And the NDP? Well, the NDP have said that they want to tear up the current NAFTA deal and renegotiate it with Donald Trump. That's not standing up for workers. That's not standing up for Windsor. So I am so happy to have 3 extraordinary candidates by my side and a range of amazing candidates across southwestern Ontario and indeed right across the country who will stand up for Canadian workers, stand up for Canadians, and invest in our future together.
So what do you say then directly to Mr. Singh's claim yesterday that he would work with you for a coalition government if the Conservatives win lots of seats but not enough for a majority?
We are working hard to elect a progressive government and stop Conservative cuts.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Salima Shivji, CBC. I'd like to get at, you're talking about the NDP a lot. Why are you suggesting something that some Canadians may find distasteful, that a vote for the NDP is worthless?
Listen, there have been great, strong, progressive oppositions in the past. And indeed, I was part of a number of opposition parties who were standing up strongly to Stephen Harper as he went ahead with cuts to culture, attacks on unions, cuts to infrastructure, cuts to our veterans, cuts to Canada's fight against climate change, cuts to Canada's place in the world. I was there for almost 10 years of a Harper government that, despite all the strong fighting we did from opposition, kept moving ahead with its cuts. Right now, we have a choice of whether we want to move forward as a country or go back to Conservative cuts. I'm choosing forward.
This call to strategic voting without actually labeling it, do you not have anything else to offer?
We are offering investments in communities right across the country. We're offering to continue the most ambitious and effective plan to fight climate change that Canada has ever had. We're making the choice to continue to invest in infrastructures, support our workers, work with our unions, engage positively around the world, strengthen gun control at a time when Conservatives want to weaken gun control. We are offering a positive, progressive vision for this country. We're offering to roll up our sleeves and keep doing the hard work we've done over the past 4 years. And I'm looking forward to the coming week where we continue to talk with Canadians and encourage them to make the right choice on October 21st.
Michelle Zillia with the Globe and Mail. A question for you in your role as Prime Minister. Have you spoken to President Trump or the Turkish president about the deteriorating situation in northeast Syria?
We strongly condemn Turkey's engagement in Syria. It is of significant preoccupation to us and to the international community. We are, of course, in close contact with our allies through official channels, but I have not spoken directly with any world leaders since I since the writ has dropped.
En français?
We strongly condemn the Turkey action in Syria, and like our allies, we are extremely preoccupied by this situation. We have been in communication with various governments on this, but I have not spoken to other government leaders since the election campaign began.
Affiliates escaped Kurdish health camps in northeastern Syria. Have Canadian officials got any information about the status of Canadians in some of those camps? Have any been escaped, been killed, or injured?
The Canadian position has not changed. It is against the law to travel overseas for the purpose of engaging in terrorist acts or even supporting terrorism. And Canada will always ensure that that law is enforced.
And Glenn McGregor, CTV News. A procedural question. Do you believe that the party that wins the plurality of seats in an election should have the first opportunity to form government, or should the incumbent party have the first crack at it?
There are many academics and experts who very clearly laid out the different scenarios and ways that elections in this country unfold. They've done a great job at unfolding our elections over the past 150 plus years. My focus is on electing a progressive government and stopping conservative cuts.
Can you clarify, yes, like straight up yes or no answer, would you be willing to form a coalition government?
My focus is on electing a progressive government and stopping conservative cuts.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. Tom Perry with CBC. You're talking about electing a progressive government. There are some progressive voters who are disappointed with you, and maybe they want to have a progressive government, but maybe with the NDP there, making sure that you stay progressive. So what do you say to them?
I say the Canadians have an important choice to make in the coming week. We can choose to move forward with a government that has continued to invest in people, that has succeeded in lifting 900,000 people out of poverty and seen our economy create over 1 million jobs, most of them full-time. I've seen a government that has invested for the first real plan to fight climate change in Canada's history, is continuing to put our values first and foremost on the world stage, or we can go back to conservative cuts. That's the choice facing Canadians.
You were asked a little earlier about electoral reform, and a lot of people disappointed about that. So do you understand how some people might want to have the NDP there to keep you honest?
I understand that Canadians have a range of choices to make in the coming week, but I know that we need to continue to move forward on investments in families, not cuts. Investment in infrastructure, not cuts. Investment in a real plan to fight climate change, not a commitment by Andrew Scheer to rip it up the day after he got elected.
Windsor Star, want to focus my question on something here, a local question. How much does the talk of a coalition government hurt you here, where people may feel that they can still vote NDP? And
I've spoken with a lot of people in Windsor who are very worried that Jagmeet Singh wants to reopen NAFTA. People in Windsor were really worried as we were facing Donald Trump and his desire to rip up NAFTA and the impact that would have on the entire Canadian economy, particularly economies here in Windsor that are so deeply tied to our American neighbors, is of real concern. And we need to continue to have a strong government with a clear focus on standing up for Canadians, standing up to Donald Trump, standing up to the forces of populism and chaos around the world, and focus on investing in Canadians and promoting our values at home and abroad. That's what so many Canadians I talk to want, and that's exactly what we're focused on delivering on October 21st. Nous reconnaissons à quel point les gens
We recognize that people in Windsor and right across the country were afraid for their jobs and for their children's jobs and the future of the Canadian economy when Donald Trump threatened to scrap the NAFTA agreement, on which we all depend for economic growth here in Canada. And people were very reassured when we stood up to him, when we were able to come together and negotiate a new NAFTA agreement that protects our jobs, that protects the jobs of our children. So people are concerned about the fact that the NDP has announced that it would reopen, renegotiate that agreement, and therefore set aside the agreement that we signed with such difficulty with Donald Trump. That's not good news for workers and Canadians. That's not the news they need. What they need is a progressive government that will defend the interests of workers every day, aluminum and steel workers, such as we did, workers right across this country, and build a stronger economy for our children and grandchildren.
Grace Macaluso, Automotive News Canada. As you know, the auto industry is hugely important in cities like Windsor and Oshawa, and as you also know, Fiat Chrysler and General Motors have announced almost 4,000 in job cuts under your government's watch. What would a re-elected Liberal government do to stave off those cuts and prevent the further shrinking of the auto manufacturing footprint in this country?
We stood up and we will continue to stand up for auto workers, for industry in this country. That was a core preoccupation with NAFTA, and that's why we got stringent labor standards brought in for Mexican car manufacturers. That means Canadian auto workers and American auto workers will continue to be competitive with lower wage areas like Mexico. We're going to continue to invest in the future of manufacturing and the future of the auto industry. I was pleased with many of the investments that showcase that Canada is indeed a key part of the future of the automotive industry, with engineering hubs and research hubs and recognitions that the quality of manufacturing done at our various plants across Ontario is world-class and competitive with any jurisdiction in the world. We've made significant changes to the SIF fund to be able to create greater investments, and that's how we were able to draw in record investments by companies like Toyota and others in the auto industry here in southwestern Ontario, because we know that Canadian workers are world-class, are competitive, are forward-thinking, are educated, and are able to compete with the very best in the world. And we're going to continue to fight for our auto workers, continue to fight for the next generation of workers here across Ontario and across the country as we build the future that we're all moving so quickly towards.
New Democrats, though, are arguing that the labor provisions in the new NAFTA aren't strong enough to protect Canadian jobs. Are you not open to, do you not see that as an opportunity to work with the New Democrats in a coalition government to strengthen that provision and make it enforceable?
We've actually been working with Democrats in the United States to ensure that the provisions in NAFTA are the right ones for workers, are the right ones for the environment. And I'll remind people that when we made a significant deal about including protections for women, protections for workers, protections for the environment, mentions of Indigenous peoples in our negotiating position around NAFTA, Conservatives and others laughed at us and told us we shouldn't be doing that as part of a NAFTA. But we know that standing up for workers as a government, working closely with unions, I was very happy to have leaders of Unifor and the Canadian Labour Congress and others working with us as part of our NAFTA Council to negotiate the right deal for Canadians. And indeed, that standing up for labor, that standing up for the environment is a key part of why the Democrats are looking positively at the opportunity to ratify this NAFTA, even under Donald Trump's Republican administration. We know that delivering for Canadians is something that requires us to stand together and stand strong. That's what we've done over the past 4 years. That's what we're looking forward to continuing to do over the next 4 years if Canadians continue to choose forward.
I'd like to know what a Liberal government would do. Like, we've heard a lot about the climate plan that the Liberal government is bringing forward. A lot of it are macro solutions, I like to say. You know, they're countrywide solutions. But what would a Liberal government do to help cities and towns help their residents? Is it an increase in infrastructure spending? Is it incentives for homeowners? What would you do, I guess, because this region has dealt a lot with climate change, a lot of flooding. And I think homeowners are very concerned about the future of their homes.
Yeah. To start with that, I'm happy to highlight the initiative we put forward to help homeowners renovate and retrofit their homes. We recognize that people want to save money in the medium term, and they want to fight climate change, but they might be worried about affordability and groceries and not have the capital up front to change their windows or change their furnace, which is why through CMHC we're making available a $40,000 interest-free loan for homeowners and for landlords with renters to make that investment that over the course of a few years will be able to pay off that loan without having to pay any interest at all. We're also making sure that so people can see what kind of investments would be best for them, they will have access to free home energy audits so that they can actually make the changes tangibly in their home that will both save them money and fight climate change, because absolutely, people want to be part of it. It contrasts with the Conservatives' retrofit plan, which is a tax credit. So you have to spend the money first and then try and get some of it back at tax time, which, quite frankly, for people struggling with affordability and daily bills, is not a realistic plan to fight climate change. But we already knew that of the Conservatives. But you mentioned municipalities as well. Over the past 4 years, we have invested record amounts of money in municipalities on infrastructure. But over the past little while, we've seen an increasing number of provincial governments, particularly conservative provincial governments, not wanting to spend on infrastructure, not working with the federal government when we have investment money ready to go. We have municipalities begging for that investment, but as we know, conservative governments believe in cuts and austerity and don't want to spend a single penny, even if it's infrastructure that municipalities need. Which is why last year, to get around the provinces, we doubled the municipal infrastructure transfer, known as the gas tax transfer, so municipalities could invest directly. We have some municipal leaders here who like that. The other thing that we've committed to as part of our infrastructure spending is we still want to work with all provinces because that's the best way to ensure infrastructure money gets maximized. So we've said that provinces will have 2 years to provide a list of projects that they have prioritized so the federal government can invest alongside them and municipalities in infrastructure they need. And if they have not provided that list within 2 years, we will transfer the entire infrastructure allocation through the gas tax transfer to municipalities. We will invest in communities in the way the Canadians need. And if conservative politicians and premiers want to continue with their cuts, we'll still find a way to stand up for Canadians. But that's why we need a strong federal government.
Just a follow-up question. A number of reporters up here have asked this question. A week out from the vote, we're all kind of wondering about the possibility of a coalition government. Saying that you would work with the NDP, is that an admission of defeat a week out from the vote?
We have demonstrated on many issues over the past 4 years that we are happy to draw on opposition parties to move forward on important initiatives for Canadians. But ultimately, standing up against Jason Kenney and Doug Ford on cuts and on fighting for a cleaner environment, standing up to Donald Trump and other challenging leaders around the world requires a government that is able to pull together all Canadians and move forward. I know Canadians understand the choice facing them. Do we move forward and continue to invest in our communities and our future? Or do we go back to conservative cuts? I'm for moving forward. Merci tout le monde. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming down. Thanks for coming down.
It's a pleasure. I've seen this horse betting. I was looking forward to this.
I might get it.
That's all good.